Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not taking a short nap in my sarcophagus for 3,700 years, I'm here at Castle Wolfula reviewing movies. Universal Horror Month continues on as I cover The Mummy, released in 1932, directed by Karl Freund, and starring Boris Karloff in the title role.
Osiris will release thy soul.
Now, the version of The Mummy some of you might be more familiar with is actually a remake. I'm, of course, referring to the highly popular and successful Mummy starring Tom Cruise. I can understand the confusion surrounding remakes. The recent Brendan Fraser film, The Whale, is actually a remake of a Boris Karloff film released in the 30s. I'm pretty sure The Whale is the only Brendan Fraser remake of a Boris Karloff movie, though.
I need to know that I have done one thing right with my life!
Anyway, following the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb and the carting off of ancient Egyptian artifacts for display in their rightful home of Great Britain, mummy fever was in full swing. Not the venereal disease, mind you. I mean, there was a great fascination for ancient Egyptian culture. Egypt became associated with lavish luxury. Just don't go there actually expecting it to be like that. And many of the old movie palaces were even themed with Egyptian motifs. In turn, mummies returning from death and the supposed curses that follow disturbing their tombs became tropes frequently explored in horror literature dating back to the 19th century. Universal saw potential for a film centered around a mummy, but unlike their films based on Dracula and Frankenstein, Universal's mummy film has no direct literary basis, but it does bear similarities to previously written mummy literature. The Mummy was written by John Balderston, who not only wrote Universal's Dracula and a draft of Frankenstein, but he also worked as a journalist with the New York Times, and Balderston was in Egypt covering the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb as it was happening, which got Universal interested in a mummy film to begin with.
Permit me to present you with the most sensational find since that of Tutankhamun.
Directing The Mummy was Karl Freund, marking his first American film as a director, but he had previously been the cinematographer for Dracula and Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Freund was notably very difficult to work with on The Mummy, and frequently mistreated his female star, Zita Johann, so Freund was only a director of films for 3 years before returning to cinematography for the rest of his life. One guy working on this film who never had trouble getting work, though, was Boris Karloff in the title role. He became a star after the release of Frankenstein in 1931, and in just 1 year, he got top billing in his next horror movie, The Mummy. But the larger-than-life mystique surrounding Boris Karloff led to Universal very quickly only crediting him on posters as Karloff, or in The Mummy's case, Karloff the Uncanny. In the years since, The Mummy has become the monster Universal has revisited the most. But how does the original film hold up? Here's my review of The Mummy. But first, I have a message from my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday, and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested, and I thank you in advance.
Your pardon, I dislike to be touched. An Eastern prejudice.
After the credits, The Mummy begins with a bit of a backstory surrounding the film's key plot device, the Scroll of Thoth, essentially a fictionalized version of the Book of the Dead, said to contain magic words that can bring the dead back to life. The sequence actually contains the same music from Swan Lake that Dracula played during its credits. And the recycling of things from Dracula doesn't end there. The plot of The Mummy bears a lot of similarities to Dracula, and a lot of the cast is carried over from Dracula too, which is understandable. The Mummy was one of Universal's early monster movies not based on a famous book, so it makes sense that Universal would want to leverage the success of one of their big hits from the previous year.
Dracula is our vampire. This is the evil force that has been attacking her. Burn the scroll, then.
In a lot of ways, The Mummy was actually Universal making a movie that was a fusion of Dracula and Frankenstein to try to double their success in one movie. The premise and cast of Dracula, but with Karloff in the lead, playing a Dracula-like figure that looks scary like the monster from Frankenstein.
Here.
We had foreseen this.
Past the prologue, The Mummy opens with its most memorable and powerful scene because, well, it's pretty much the only scene that really has a mummy in it.
Looks as though he died in some sensationally unpleasant manner.
Ralph Norton, a junior member of a 1921 British expedition to steal ancient Egyptian artifacts, study Egyptian artifacts. Well, Ralph is frustrated that everybody else gets to study the cool Egyptian shit, and he's stuck looking at pottery fragments.
Much more is learned from studying bits of broken pottery than from all the sensational finds.
And a find like this? Well, how can you wait?
His expedition did uncover a mummy, though, known as Imhotep, or by his full name, In My Honest Opinion Tep. And Imhotep is unusual for a mummy in that he was buried alive, but the reason for this is up for speculation, though Ralph has a pretty good hunch why.
Maybe he got too gay with the Vestal Virgins in the temple.
Who hasn't gotten a little gay with the Vestal Virgins? That's what they're there for. Anyway, one of the artifacts discovered is a box that will curse whoever opens it.
Good heavens, what a terrible curse.
So, of course, when nobody's looking, Ralph opens the box, translates the scroll inside it, and reads aloud its magic spell, bringing the nearby Imhotep to life. Of course, this was 1932, so people were much more easily frightened. You could show them a train approaching and they'd lose their shit. Oh, God! Oh, I thought that was a real train for a second. But the point is, people were easier to shock. So when the mummy comes to life in the film, we just see his eyes open and he slightly moves, but that was enough to scare people. With Jack Pierce's convincing makeup turning Boris Karloff into the closest thing to a real mummy the screen had ever seen before, and suddenly seeing what looks like a real corpse come to life, it was really spooky for audiences watching this in the 30s. And they sell the fear with Ralph's frenzied reaction where the sight of the mummy walking alone turns him into a lunatic and he dies laughing in a mental institute a decade later.
Queer story that young Oxford chap he had with him going mad.
He was laughing when your father found it. He died laughing, in a straitjacket.
It was a pretty shocking way to open a movie for the time. When I first saw this film back in 1932, I assumed Ralph would be the cocky hero of the movie, but he essentially is the first victim of Imhotep before the story begins proper.
He went for a little walk.
The actual story of the mummy, which jumps ahead 10 years later, well, it's a bit more low-key, even compared to its low-key by today's standards opening. But the plot is still engaging, even if it's not particularly horrific. Essentially, Imhotep the mummy manages to clean himself up a bit and masquerades as a local historian in Cairo named Ardith Bey, short for Ardith before anyone else. And Ardith instructs the British archaeologist to dig up a lost tomb belonging to a princess of ancient Egypt named Ankhsenamun, daughter of the pharaoh Gesundite.
Part of the funerary equipment of the Princess Ankhsenamun.
Later, Ardith meets Helen, played by Zita Johann, a woman who bears a striking resemblance to the mummified princess now residing in the Cairo Museum. You know, when the princess was alive, of course.
Have we not met before, Miss Grosvenor?
No, I don't think so.
Ardith, aka Imhotep, uses his magical powers of persuasion to bring Helen to his hideout, where Ardith reveals that Helen and the princess are one and the same.
I shall awaken memories of love and crime and death.
The reason why Imhotep was buried alive in the first place was punishment for trying to bring his beloved Princess Ankh whatever back from the dead.
My love has lasted longer than the temples of our gods. No man ever suffered as I did for you.
The Mummy actually features an early depiction of reincarnation in film, with the princess returning in the form of Helen. But the movie was originally supposed to have a much more overt depiction of reincarnation, where you would see Helen's different past lives over the centuries. But those scenes were cut out and only exist now as still photos, unfortunately. Back in the day, if they cut anything out of a movie, it was going straight into the garbage. Film preservation was not a thing.
Until I send back your spirit that has wandered through so many forms and so many ages.
Basically, though, The Mummy is more of a supernatural romance than a horror film, and it works well on that level, especially through Karloff's magnetic performance as this sympathetic, misguided sorcerer who will do anything to get back the love that was taken from him nearly 4,000 years ago.
You have studied our ancient arts, and you know that you cannot harm me. You also know that you must return that scroll to me or die.
Considering Karloff's last monster role had him mostly grunting, The Mummy was a great opportunity for Karloff to show his dramatic range as an actor. He could go from playing a brutish beast to this soft-spoken priest with piercing eyes and a sadness in his voice.
It was not only this body that I loved, it was thy soul. I destroy this lifeless thing.
bringing a sense of vulnerability to nearly all of his villains.
I don't think one would forget meeting you, honestly.
Then I am mistaken.
Zita Johann does what she can with the role of Helen, but most of the time she's just hypnotized. Still, when she's not quietly doing what she's told, Johann brings a spunkiness to her role as the damsel of distress that wasn't very common at this point in Universal's horror films.
When we got the wrappings off, and I saw her face, you'll think me silly, but I sort of fell in love with her.
Do you have to open graves to find girls to fall in love with?
David Manners returns from Dracula, having played John Harker before, and has another thankless role in this film, playing Frank, the de facto hero who gets into a love triangle between Helen and Imhotep.
Oh, Helen. It's been such torture.
Frank's kinda dull and just does whatever his mentor tells him to. Dr. Muller, played by Edward Van Sloan, who played all the old mentor characters in these Universal monster movies.
Should love for you come to her, he will try to destroy you.
The Mummy isn't heavy on excitement until the finale, though. The closest thing to something scary happening is Frank's father trying to destroy the Scroll of Thoth, only for Imhotep to give the man a heart attack. You know, magic heart attack powers, that's pretty scary, I guess.
Don't try and make me believe that this artist fellow is a mummy come to life. It was that idea and the horror of it that killed my father.
You might be wondering, though, if Imhotep can be brought back to life, why doesn't he just bring the princess back the same way? And, well, it's because Imhotep was mummified while still alive, so he can kind of pass as a human being. The princess was actually fully mummified without any organs, and her soul moved on to Helen. So even if Imhotep resurrected the princess, she'd be a soulless husk, like Lindsay Lohan.
I tried then to raise this body. I could raise it now, but it would be a mere thing that moved at my will, without a soul.
So Imhotep's scheme is to kill Helen, mummify her, and bring her back to life as his eternal mummy bride. And then when they have kids, they can all call her their mummy. Helen's homies try to rescue her, but they're of course useless. Their only real purpose is exposition at the end of the day, but Helen manages to kind of save herself by praying to the Isis statue, which burns the Scroll of Thoth, causing Imhotep to crumble in an impressive cross-dissolve effect. Universal's The Mummy was ahead of its time in a lot of respects, and it still manages to make for an engaging fantasy romance film, even if it's not particularly heavy on the monster you might be watching it for. When they made sequels to The Mummy, they just had Lon Chaney Jr. dress up as an actual mummy the entire time. Karloff is fantastic as the imposing Imhotep, though, and Jack Pierce's makeup for The Mummy, while much more subtle for the rest of the film, is one of Pierce's most memorable creations. The Mummy is ultimately a nice change of pace from the typical European Gothic horror that Universal put out, and the film has an undeniable influence that persists to this day. I give The Mummy a Helen out of Princess Anck-sin-Amon. It sure was a queer bit of business, what with that mummy coming back from the dead.
Your pardon, I dislike to be touched. An Eastern prejudice.
This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.